Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another video. This one's going to get us started on topic 11, which is about the new nations emerging during and around the period of the Cold War after 1945. So the first country we're going to look at, we're going to dive into here is India. And so the last time we talked about India, of course, was in the time between World War I and World War II, and it was still part of the British Raj, when it was part of the British Empire. And of course, after World War I, we talked about the fact that Mohandas Gandhi, the man on the right-hand side here, became the leader of the Indian National Congress and started to push for peaceful resistance to British rule. And so he staged things like the Salt March and got people to boycott British businesses. And eventually the British decided that they were going to give in and allow India to have its independence. However, while they were trying to work out how that independence movement was going to happen, World War II cropped up, and of course India was expected and did bravely serve the British Empire during World War II. When World War II was over, the British Empire was basically broke, and they really needed to start getting rid of their empire that they could no longer afford to control and to manage. And so, of course, India was top of the list because it was extremely expensive for them to keep and maintain that. This, of course, provided the Indian people with a huge opportunity because it was going to accelerate the process of them getting independence, but at the same time, it also led to a very, very large problem, which was once the British announced that they were very quickly going to be leaving India and creating a constitution for India, but at the same time leaving India, what that did was it gave the Indian people the common enemy that they used to have was leaving. And so that was really the one big thing that united all of the different Indian people together. And when their common enemy was leaving, the problem was that since India was full of lots of different kinds of people, and those people rallied together against the British, when the British decided to leave, those different kinds of people, their antagonism started to rise again, and they started to disagree and fight with each other as much as they were fighting with the British. And so as the British got closer and closer to leaving, one of the big divisions within India that cropped up was the division between Hindus, which was the majority of people in India, and Muslims, who were the minority, although before the British took over, they were the governing force, if you'll remember, during the Mughal Empire. And what we see here is two of the leading opponents to British rule in India. On the right, of course, you've got Gandhi, who was a Hindu, and on the left, you've got Muhammad Jinnah, who was the leader of the Muslim League. And these two guys actually got along with each other relatively well, but the two sides that they represented did not. Muslims and Hindus in India had violent, bitter conflicts with each other. And the thing that they were concerned about was when the British left, the Muslims were worried that the Hindus were going to use their position of dominance to take away their rights and take away their property and their land and to ultimately make Muslims second-class citizens. Well, the Hindus were worried about Muslims and their influence over Indian society. And so Gandhi, of course, preached the message of peace and togetherness, and he really wanted to maintain India, the British Raj, as one unified country. However, as the independence movement got closer and closer to actually being achieved, the issue became that there was a lot of violence on both sides, and Hindus killed Muslims, and Muslims killed Hindus, and there were riots, and there were protests, and it really became a situation to the point where even Gandhi himself said, listen, it really makes more sense if we split the country up into two big pieces, one for the Muslims and one for the Hindus. And this decision was ultimately called the Partition of Pakistan. And Pakistan itself was the designation of all of the Muslim areas in the British Raj. Now, ultimately, India got its independence. Well, India and Pakistan got their independence on August the 15th of 1947, when the British Crown granted independence and left the country. The problem became, though, that places that were going to be part of Pakistan, where the majority of people were Muslims, not everybody was a Muslim. So if I'm a Hindu living in a part of Pakistan that's going to become independent, I might not feel terribly comfortable. And so the pressure is going to be, I might want to pick my family up and move to India. And if I'm a Muslim living in India, and I'm a Muslim and I'm in India, and India is a Hindu country, I may feel compelled to pick my family up and move to Pakistan. And so what we see is, as a result of this partitioning off of Pakistan for Muslims and India for Hindus, somewhere over 10 million people literally picked up, most often on foot, and moved and walked to the other country because of their religious affiliations. This is still the largest migration of human beings in the history of the world. Over 10 million people picked up and just walked to a different country. Now, of course, as they're walking past each other, there's still all of these hard feelings, there's still all of this pent-up anger and aggression, and so we see violence again. And violence erupts on all sides. Hindus attack Muslims, and Muslims attack Hindus, and again, all this does is it shows people, even like Gandhi, that it was going to be a better thing to separate the countries into two different pieces. And basically, this is how the division went. The two green zones were the areas in which you saw a majority of people as Muslims. And so that was going to be the country of Pakistan. And as you'll notice, it's in two different pieces. That's ultimately going to be a problem because people in West Pakistan really didn't get along all that well with people in East Pakistan. And so as you can see here on the map, the region of East Pakistan ultimately felt like they were being ignored by the rest of Pakistan. And so really what they wanted was independence for themselves. And of course, as the map shows you, that East Pakistan would eventually get its independence in 1971. And the really strange part about it is the people who helped them get their independence in 1971 was India. India can get along with Muslim countries. And of course, Bangladesh is a very large Muslim country, and they have a really good relationship with India. The problem was, of course, India does not get along with Pakistan. They are very bitter enemies and very bitter rivals. And one of the issues, of course, is all of those pinkish red areas within the old British Raj, because in those areas there's not really a necessarily clear majority. It's very evenly split, and all of those regions went to India. Now, the last place that's really a huge problem is up there in the northern part, which is called the disputed border. That region is called Kashmir, and Kashmir is claimed by both Pakistan and India, and even a little piece of it is claimed by China. And so there's a border conflict. The borders between India and Pakistan are still not very clear, and every so often the countries fight about that. In fact, just last year in 2019, there was a little border skirmish where the two armies started to fight with each other. And again, these countries are bitter, bitter rivals. They absolutely hate each other, and they do not get along with each other in any capacity. When it comes to Pakistan, West Pakistan, and India, again, Bangladesh and India, they get along much better. But Pakistan and India are absolutely bitter, bitter rivals with each other, and just absolutely hate each other and have this conflict over that disputed territory in Kashmir. So 1947, India gets its independence, Pakistan gets partitioned off of India, both countries are independent. Again, by 1971, Bangladesh is going to become an independent country as well. And one of the big questions, of course, was, well, who's our leader in India? Who do we look to? Who is the Indian George Washington? And of course, everybody knows it's Gandhi, and most people expected that eventually he might be the president of India. However, on January the 30th of 1948, a man named Nathuram Godse waited for Gandhi on his way to Temple and assassinated him on the 30th of January 1948. Nathuram Godse, who was in fact a Hindu. This is not even Muslim on Hindu violence. This is Hindu on Hindu violence. He was a radical, fanatic Hindu who felt that Gandhi had given Muslims what they wanted and had allowed them to escape from India and had allowed them to get a country of their own. And so he assassinated Gandhi. Nathuram Godse was ultimately given a death sentence by the new government of India, despite the fact that Gandhi's own family said, listen, our father would not want this man put to death by the government. He didn't believe in the death penalty, that sort of thing. We don't want this to happen. Government of India said, we respect your opinion, but ultimately put him to death on November the 15th of 1949. So right at its inception, right, only a few months after India became independent, they lost their founding father. They lost Mohandas Gandhi, who was assassinated by a member of his own group, right, which is extraordinarily sad. The guy who really becomes India's first leader and their first prime minister was a man named Jawaharlal Nehru, who we can see here in this particular picture. He set India up in a really interesting position because one of the things a lot of people were worried about is when India gets its independence, are they going to stay part of this kind of British sphere of influence? Will they join NATO? Will they be a capitalist democracy? Or, of course, since they're a poor country, are they going to join with the Warsaw Pact? Are they going to become a communist country? Are they going to become part of the Com Bloc? And that question was really first and foremost in everybody's mind. Well, Nehru actually was a really smart guy, and what he decided to do is he said, listen, if we don't join either alliance, we could trade with both of them, and we could do whatever was necessary to make India really a prosperous and successful country. And so he became one of the leaders of what we call the non-aligned movement, which was actually the third option in the Cold War. Nehru allowed India to kind of play both sides of the Cold War. Sometimes he traded with the Soviet Union, sometimes he traded with the United States and with NATO allies and with Western European countries. And that really allowed him to kind of ride the fence and to play the middle and to ultimately find India's path as opposed to having an allegiance to one or the other alliance. He also did a couple of other really important things, like he invested heavily in what was called the Green Revolution, which was farming innovations and the application of modern science and technology to the production of food, which was really, really important because India had a huge and growing population, and that Green New Deal really allowed him to feed his people and to keep the country in a stable platform. Nehru is seen as the father of modern India, right? And again, he's a really important guy because he allows India to very carefully navigate the height of that Cold War without getting pulled into one side or the other. Now, eventually what happens is he dies, and when he dies, his daughter, in 1964, takes over the office of Prime Minister after her father died. Her name was Indira Gandhi. Now, she is not related to Mohandas Gandhi. She was Jawaharlal Nehru's daughter, and she becomes the leader in 1964. And a lot of people underestimated her because she was a woman. And really, she's one of the first women to be a significant world leader. She was the prime minister of one of the largest and most important countries in the world at the time. And a lot of people, and especially the people who underestimated her, were the Pakistanis. Pakistan thought that, well, she's a woman, so we can do whatever we want, and we can push her around, and we'll take Kashmir from her. Well, what they didn't anticipate, of course, was that Indira Gandhi was going to actually be a relatively tough prime minister. And of course, one of the things she started working on as a really tough prime minister was a nuclear weapons program to scare the Pakistanis and to make India into a nuclear power. On May the 18th of 1974, India tested its very first nuclear weapon, which was called Smiling Buddha, very close to the border with Pakistan to try to scare them and to try to show them that India was going to be a major power and that they weren't going to be pushed around by Pakistan. And again, it made that country a very dangerous country, particularly to the Pakistanis, who they didn't get along with. And to this day, actually, the border between Pakistan and India is incredibly dangerous just because the country is nuclear armed. Now, beyond that, we see a couple of other really interesting things, although most of them are sad, about what's going to go on in India under Indira Gandhi. This is a site that actually we've seen before. This is in the city of Amritsar in northern India. This is called the Golden Temple. And it's actually one of the holiest sites anywhere for a religion called the Sikh religion. The Sikh religion finds this place to be incredibly important to them because one of the founders of the Sikh religion is believed to have gone in here and then told his followers, I'll be back someday, and then disappeared. And so the belief is that when he comes back, he's going to reappear inside of the Golden Temple. And every day, this temple gets around 250,000 visitors, which is absolutely an enormous number of people going to visit the Golden Temple every single day. Well, because it's important to the Sikh people really felt as though, some of the Sikh people at least, really felt as though they had been shortchanged by the partition of Pakistan and they really wanted a country of their own. In 1984, a group of Sikh extremists seized control of the Golden Temple and started to demand independence for their particular region of India. However, they were using the Golden Temple and really the massacre as a symbol of national identity. They said, the massacre in Amritsar started Indian independence. Well, we'll use Amritsar's Golden Temple as a symbol for the religious tension and the conflict in India, and then ultimately we'll use that as our symbol of Sikh independence. Now, the problem, of course, is that Indira Gandhi actually ordered the army to move in on the Golden Temple and to retake it, and many people were actually killed in this military operation. And so Amritsar and the Golden Temple itself actually became another symbol of a massacre, but this time it was of the Sikh people. Now, eventually what that produced was, in 1989, two of Indira Gandhi's own bodyguards, who were themselves Sikhs, assassinated her as a result of her handling of the Golden Temple massacre. So again, this is not what you want to see. This is not positive for India. This is, India is still a country with massive, massive problems. Ethnic tension and religious conflict and all of these things are still present inside of India to this day. Now, the other thing that changes that's really, really important to us, of course, is on May the 28th of 1998, what we can see here is a mountain, and you can see that there's a cloud of dust coming off of this mountain because the whole mountain is shaking. The reason this whole mountain is shaking is May the 28th of 1998, Pakistan developed its first nuclear weapon, and they detonated it to show the world that they were a nuclear power and to threaten India. And so now, today, both sides have nuclear weapons, and both sides have promised that if they get into a big enough war, they will use them on each other. So as of right now, 2020, it seems as though the most likely place in the world to have a nuclear war is between India and Pakistan, and they absolutely do not get along. And every couple of years, they start shooting at each other over Kashmir, and it's a very dangerous and difficult situation. And politically, it's a pressure cooker, right? It could go off at any time, and it could be really, really bad. Okay, so beyond India and Pakistan, let's look at a couple of other countries. The next country we're going to look at is Myanmar. This is the old country of Burma. When the British controlled it, it was called Burma. Today it's called Myanmar. In 1989, Myanmar actually turned into a military dictatorship, which means the military overthrew the country, dissolved the constitution, dissolved people's constitutional rights, and took control through a direct dictatorship. Now, when that happened, the lady on the left here, her name is Aung San Suu Kyi. She was a democracy advocate, and she started to protest and to get people organized to resist this military occupation. And as a result of that, the military actually sentenced her to house arrest on July the 20th of 1989. Now, because she was under house arrest, it very much limited her, but she also became an international symbol. Her husband, who's sitting on her left, is a British citizen, and so he was able to travel around the world and to talk to people about what was happening to his wife, to Aung San Suu Kyi, and she really became almost an international celebrity for her protest and for her house arrest, for advocating for people's rights and for democracy and that sort of thing. Now, ultimately, the international pressure on the government of Myanmar really started to escalate because people said, "Why are you so afraid of this woman? This small little woman is so scary to you that you have to lock her in her house." Again, her house arrest started in July the 20th of 1989, and it continued through November 13th of 2010. 21 years she was under house arrest, until ultimately the international pressure rose to the level where she was released from prison. Now, once they released her from prison, though, of course, she continued advocating for people's rights, and ultimately, the government of Myanmar, 5 years later, after they released her from prison, said in 2015, we're going to hold new presidential election. And of course, everybody knew that Aung San Suu Kyi would run and would almost certainly win the election in 2015. Now, the military realized that, and they did something specifically to make sure she couldn't win, which was they passed a constitutional amendment that said the president of Myanmar could not be married to a foreigner. And so ultimately, because Aung San Suu Kyi was married to a British man, she was ineligible to run. So what she did instead was she ran a member of her party as the new president of Myanmar. And what she told the people was, if you elect him, I'll secretly be running the country from behind the scenes. In 2015, her candidate did win, and she is now seen really as the elected leader of Myanmar, even though she's constitutionally not able to be the president. Now, on the one hand, that's good because she gets to win in the end. However, she spent 21 years under house arrest to fight for democracy, and then she became the president of the country without actually getting voted in. She is secretly pulling the strings behind the scenes, which, again, it's this very strange thing that you see in a lot of countries like Myanmar, where people come to power with the promise of democracy and then they wield powers that they really shouldn't or don't have. And so they set themselves up almost as a dictatorship. And in Myanmar, it's really no different, where we've seen under her authority, we've seen things like ethnic conflicts in the northern part of the country. And so what seemed like it should have been the promise of a better life for Myanmar ultimately turned into not that. The next country on our list is Indonesia. Now, Indonesia, you can see, is a gigantic country. There are over 10,000 islands in the country. It's also the world's largest Muslim country by population, but it also has a tremendous diversity, both of religion and ethnicity, and lots and lots and lots of important stuff go on here. Strategically, it's an incredibly important region for things like trade and interactions with East Asia. In 1949, Indonesia got its independence. After the Japanese Empire was defeated, they received their full independence. And they were originally governed by a president named Sukarno. Sukarno was the president from 1945 until 1967, when he himself was overthrown by one of his generals named Suharto. Suharto, in 1965, overthrew Sukarno and set up a military dictatorship. Now, when he did, people were very concerned about this, but the thing that allowed Sukarno to really take control and hold control of Indonesia was Sukarno hated communists. And so ultimately he started to root out and to murder as many communists in Indonesia as he possibly could. And one of the reasons that that was a really smart thing for him to do was that made him very likable to the United States. And the United States helped to support him and prop him up and to continue his brutal military dictatorship, starting in 1965 and continuing thereafter, because ultimately he was an anti-communist. So for our purposes, he was a good guy, and we supported him. Not necessarily that he was a good guy, but we thought he was a good guy because he was an anti-communist. So that did not set Indonesia up in a good place during the Cold War, of course, because they had this brutal military dictatorship supported by the United States. To that same end, of course, we get the Philippines. Now, the Philippines, of course, you'll remember, in 1899 becomes a territory of the United States after the Spanish-American War. And of course, for almost 50 years, they protested that, and then we had to fight a couple of conflicts in the Philippines to keep them as part of the United States. After World War II, the United States decided that the Philippines was going to be independent, and so in 1946, the United States granted the Philippines its full-blown independence. In 1965, Ferdinand Marcos decided that democracy was really no longer working for the Philippines, and so ultimately established himself a dictatorship. He and his wife, Imelda Marcos, spent incredible amounts of money on things and ultimately helped to bankrupt the country in which people were starving. However, Imelda Marcos was very famous for her over 3,000 pairs of designer shoes. You know, many, many, many thousands and thousands of dollars tied up in each pair of these shoes, ultimately in a country where people are literally starving. Now, one of his chief rivals was a man named Benigno Aquino, who in the 1970s, uh, Ferdinand Marcos had killed and had put to death. In the 80s, his wife, Corazon Aquino, became the leader of a new movement called People Power. And in 1986, People Power under Corazon Aquino, again, the widow of Benigno Aquino, who was one of his chief rivals, in 1986, Ferdinand Marcos was forced to hold elections, and those elections were won by the People Power movement. And Ferdinand Marcos was forced to resign and to step down. In 1992, Corazon Aquino stepped down and started this process of more normalized democratic elections, of having normal, regular elections. Now, what we see is that since 2010, Benigno Aquino III is now the president of the Philippines, and they are making some progress. They are starting to get into the kind of custom of having regular, normal elections. Things are okay for, sometimes, at least they were under Benigno Aquino. The problem today in the Philippines is they've got a new president, and he's really threatening things like constitutionalism and the rule of law, and doing things according to the way the law is written. So again, it's kind of a mixed bag in the Philippines, just as it is in Indonesia. There's some good things, there's some not so good things, but that's kind of the situation that we get in these new countries in South Asia and Southeast Asia. There's some good parts, there's some not so good parts. But hopefully this video is helpful to you. Hopefully it helped to explain Section 11. In the next video, we're going to look at the new countries, a lot of new countries in Africa that get their independence, and the varying degrees of success that they find in their independence movements. So I hope everybody is staying healthy. I hope everybody is staying safe. Like this video, subscribe for the notifications when the new ones go up. Leave a comment down below if you'd like to. Leave me a question on Classroom if you've got any, and I will see you guys in the next video.